This is the sort of paper talk hour of the day. Before we begin, I am just going to remind everyone of a couple of things. First of all, closed captioning is available. There is the closed captioning box at the bottom of the Zoom screen to turn your captions on and off. The session is being recorded, and there is the code of conduct and the collaborative note-taking document, which our tech assistant, Ashley, will link in the chat for us today. Each presentation will have 15 minutes with 5 minutes for a Q&A. At the 1 minute mark, I will play this sound so that everyone is just aware of how much time they have left. Without further ado, we will introduce you to the first speakers for the hour. Rachel Keiko Stark is the Health Sciences Librarian for Sacramento State University, and today she is presenting with Jenessa and McElfresh, who is the Health Sciences Librarian at Clemson University. And they will be presenting a very interesting talk on thriving in an intergenerational health sciences workforce. Jenessa and Rachel, you are free to take over the screen.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to be sharing my screen with y'all. This does limit my ability to see any chat questions, so please do leave those for the end when we can go ahead and take a look at that. All right, so as mentioned, my name is Rachel Keiko Stark, the Health Sciences Librarian at Sacramento State University. With me today is my fabulous research partner.
Hi there, my name is Jenessa McElfresh. I'm the Health Sciences Librarian at Clemson University.
And we just want to take a moment to acknowledge that February is Black History Month, and we acknowledge those who were forcibly taken to what is now called the United States of America. And we recognize that Black history does not start with slavery and happens every day, all year round.
Let's also take a moment to acknowledge the Indigenous peoples of all of the lands we're on today. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving the relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. So let's pause for a moment and reflect upon the ways that our actions can help advance indigeneity and seek equity for Native and Indigenous peoples. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, so today we're going to cover in a very brief 15 minutes, a little bit about the information about who's working in health sciences libraries as applies to generational concepts, what are librarians experiencing, what can libraries do, and what we would suggest as future considerations.
So as our introduction, we want to introduce who's working in libraries today. Who do we see around us? Who are our collaborators and our colleagues? So overall, the workplace today is seeing an unprecedented amount of diversity in age. Sometimes there are 4 or even 5 generations working together, and this is completely new to our modern era. With such differences in upbringing, experiences, and knowledge, conflict is to be expected, and that's not always a bad thing. It doesn't have to be the only outcome, as training and other initiatives can lead to understanding, and understanding can lead to development, and development can lead to growth, and leveraging the awesome diversity that we have today in order to build better health sciences libraries. So a few definitions as well. We're going to be using the Pew Research Center's definition of generations. If you're unaware, the Pew Research Center is a widely respected institution and makes its definitions and much of its data on the various generations available for free. That being said, we're using the silent generation to mean individuals born between 1928 and 1945, boomer or baby boomer for those born between 1946 and 1964, Gen X or Generation X for individuals born between 1965 and 1980, Millennials refers to those born between 1981 and 1996, and our newest generation, Gen Z, Generation Z, for those born between 1997 and 2012. And that is the most recent named generation from Pew.
So there is a lack of recent published information on intergenerational communication in general. This includes in multiple fields and is inclusive, of course, of libraries itself. There's almost no research published on intergenerational communication in libraries. And considering the great diversity that we're working in this day and age, this is kind of a problem, right? We need to have really good, high quality information that will allow us to make our workplaces more inclusive, more welcoming, and to really leverage all this amazing information and diversity that's contained within our own libraries. So we have found that leadership and management publications have done some good work on this, particularly looking at how to improve and influence people's willingness to have these intergenerational conversations and to learn from each other. So we've drawn a lot from that in some of our previous work. And while their focus is on more of that workplace interactions, one of the things that we believe could make this very important to librarians and to health sciences libraries in particular is our placement within a community. A health sciences library, whether it's in the academic or hospital setting, is going to be a place where people from many different areas, including people that represent many different generations, interact and have to work together to provide services, whether that's ensuring that we have a clear pathway of care that's supported by the best possible evidence, or whether that's ensuring that our future clinicians have the information that they need to be the best possible clinicians that they can be. We all play a role in this, and if we are lacking the ability to communicate well and effectively across generations, we are not providing the best possible services, and we're not incorporating some amazing talent that might be available to us.
That being said, Rachel did just say that there's not a lot of research on this in libraries, so we set out to change that. We had an article published in October 2020 in JMLA. We're really fond of our title. It's Avocado Toast and Pot Roast, Exploring Perceptions of Generational Communication Differences Among Health Sciences Librarians. This article is based on a survey we sent out in 2018, which explores the generation-based experiences and opinions of health sciences librarians. So if you were one of the 178 folks who responded, thank you so much. Overall, though, we found that health sciences librarians have varying perspectives on the interplay of their generation in the workforce, compared to their years in the workforce, other generational labels. That part, the connections aren't as strong, but nearly all of the respondents expressed really strong opinions related to the personality and abilities of their own and other generations, which colors the workforce experience. It's important to note that our research explored perceptions of generations in the workforce. We didn't set out to prove whether generations exist or not. That's kind of a hot topic we weren't going near. For us, what was most important was that some people really believe in generations and those labels, and other people don't. And that influences how we view ourselves and how we view our coworkers when we interact. So over the next few slides, I'm going to read unedited representative responses to just one question in our survey. As I read these responses, we ask that you would reflect on how you would answer this question, and please share any reactions, emotions, or opinions on how you feel or what you feel reading these in the chat box. So our question we wanted to show you was, do you identify with the generational label assigned to your year of birth? And so here are our responses. I do feel that I'm a millennial, but I do not feel as though I fit the stereotypes of the millennial generation. Identify more with Gen X, even though I was born in 1989. Generations are a social construct that needlessly separate our society, but at least most millennials aren't hateful about it, like people in other age groups I've seen in general. I'm at the tail end of boomers, identify several attributes of the post-boomers. Gen X is a title that doesn't illustrate the contribution of my generation. Instead, it negates it. At the same time, it does illustrate the lost feelings a lot of us had in our youth. Often described as angry and resentful in the media, which I'm not a silent generation. I've always felt that descriptions of the generations as I've read them don't apply to me, that I'm a mix of at least Gen X and millennial. Born in 1981, I'm technically a millennial, but as I am on the cusp, I identify more with Generation X. I'm squarely in the middle of the baby boom generation and have always identified with that. Yes and no. I do call myself a millennial, and I personify a few of the characteristics, but I consider myself a bit of an old school. I've managed to purchase a house, get married, have a child, and follow a steady career path. Many of these things are not very common in my generation. I believe in hard work, I avoid unwise debt, and I'm steadfastly Christian. However, I am also highly reliant on technology and tend to be quite liberal, progressive, center leftist. I feel like I'm a bit of a mix. Depending on whose definition is used, I tick most of the boxes. I disagree with the concept of labeling people according to when they were born. The where and the who are much more important. I was a latchkey kid. Mom went back to work. I was a slacker. I loved MTV, self-absorbed partier, was determined to be an individual and to be respected for my individuality. Rebellious, yet also a giver who also wanted to be religious at the same time, an enigma. Not sure what I'm supposed to be like, but I live with post-millennials, so I suppose they keep me from being too stuck in the past. I am the quintessential baby boomer. My dad served in World War II. I was born in '78. Some stereotypes about Gen X work, some about millennials work, and most from either don't. I am an old soul who is far more independent than most millennials and far less tech dependent or comfortable. So these are responses to just one question. Talking about this raised a lot of feelings and opinions among those who took our survey. These are really representative of some of the themes. We also recognize it can be a little overwhelming, but it's important that we know that these perspectives are who we're working with and what we're bringing to the table when we reflect on our own feelings on this. So, and thank you to those sharing in the chat. You are welcome to continue sharing as we go along.
Yes, there's a lot of discussion going on in the chat about various terms to talk about in between generations. When you look at the literature that's published on intergenerational workplaces, intergenerational communications, and generational labels, you will often find there is a huge difference in how that is defined, the terms used, and what the appropriate, in quotation marks, year for birth is counted as. That's why for our survey, we started with the Pew definitions, because again, it's free, open access, everyone can look at it, and they have a huge amount of data that corresponds with the definitions that they provide. So we are very excited to see all this work with people, the responses from people in our chat. Thank you so much. There's a lot of really interesting work also on the switch from millennial to Gen Z, iGen, all of these different concepts. So that was something that was explored as well. Aw, thank you. Pew is perfect. That's cute. Pew is excellent. We like Pew. So some of the themes that we gathered from the survey responses that we had were frustration. So interactions between generations can be kind of negative. There was a strong agreement on that with many of our survey responses, particularly when it comes to as I mentioned, frustration, and also a lack of empathy. As a millennial, and there's all these news stories coming out about how we're killing all these industries and we don't like to talk to people and blah blah blah. So when you have all this media input, it does influence the way that certain generations are seen. Polarization was another theme. Individuals tend to view other generations in comparison with how they themselves have been described, and oftentimes this is in a more negative light. There's been some really interesting commentary and work in generational labels about the concept of baby boomers and the things that they've done in comparison with the greatest generations. And then also doubt, right? Like some people really are doubtful if this is something that's worth considering. Obviously, we're doing research on this, so it's of interest to us, but we are appreciative of everyone who comes out and participates.
So whenever we think about these the different themes in our responses, we have to think about how they are applied in library settings. We identified 3 things that libraries really need to focus on whenever we're picking apart the generational interplay to facilitate a more cohesive workplace experience. These different things we need to look at are communication, of course. We know that generational identity can have an influence on communication, both verbally and whenever we communicate via technology, like we're here today on Zoom. We also know that this perception, that polarization has a big part in it, especially stereotypes and media hype. I'm a millennial, so I was on Twitter earlier today, and there was an article trending about how now millennials and Gen Z are fighting on TikTok. I don't know that that's necessarily true or not. However, it's all around us. These discussions keep happening, the stereotypes keep being spread, and we just need to be aware that that's influencing people and those we work with. And this leads us to adaptation. We need to understand and accept differences across the spectrum. We can typify people, identities are formed through so many wonderful components, but we also need to understand and accept differences. Rachel, you're still muted.
Thank you. So now we're going to discuss what can libraries do. And I want to keep track of time, so I can go rush through this. My apologies. So some of the common things that have been discussed in the literature and that were also included in responses from our survey participants were workshops, whether that's virtual or in person, informal socialization, whether that's, happy hours or, doing some sort of like get together that's structured, whether it be through a professional organization or through your place of employment. Article discussions, this can actually be really fun because as librarians, we love to find things, and finding good quality information on this can be tricky, so it's a fun challenge. And also impactful trainings. And the word impactful is very important. There have been some really interesting discussions about whether or not certain trainings can actually be helpful. So when you're thinking about designing that, please consider, the various options that are coming through and that are going to be hopefully impactful. All right, and then we'll hurry up and close up since we have a minute.
We've got this. And so whenever we're planning our trainings and interventions, we need to keep the outcomes in mind. 3 outcomes that we've identified that might be useful at your organization are open communication, making sure that everyone's up and able to work with the different communication strategies available. Willingness to change. We do these sorts of trainings because we're looking for a change at the end. So administrators and staff must be willing to try out new behaviors, whether it works or whether it doesn't. And we need to move into a cohesive workforce model, moving from us versus them to viewing library employees as one team.
So basically problems versus solution, most trainings fail. So we need to develop better trainings. We have a couple suggestions on what that might look like. First, acknowledge, right? People don't necessarily like generational labels. Consider this as a tool. This is just one way to describe yourself. It's one aspect of someone's identity. And also be respectful. If someone chooses to identify that way, that's their choice, and we're going to work with what you have. Communication is going to be key. A lot of generational trainings devolve into communication theory trainings, which is fine. But if you're going to frame it as a generational communication, please keep it within that. Multimodal is going to be important, particularly in the time of Zoom. You want to be respectful of everyone's different abilities, comfort, and capabilities. And then you want to do follow-up. One training is definitely not enough.
And that leads us to our real conclusions. What are we working towards here? The multi-generational workforce is going to continue to grow, and more diversity means more ideas, more differences. We need to develop a toolbox for organizations and for individuals to know how to address unique components that we can lead to solutions. Communication skills and cultural humility are going to be key to this across the board. And if you're in administration, we need to acknowledge, embrace, and work to ensure that everyone is heard and valued. There is work behind this, but really, we just all have to work together, work across these differences, and be aware that we're bringing this to work with us. That being said, thank you so much for your engagement, especially in the chat. I know there are really good links in there. If you have questions, we're happy to answer them, or you can email either of us. And we need to give a shout out to SlidesGo, Flat Icon, and Free Pick for these slides because we did not design them ourselves. Our skills aren't that good.
Your slides were beautiful. So good taste anyways. So if anyone would like to put questions in the chat, we will bring them up and read them out to you guys. We are just about at the end of your sort of official time, but we have a little padding time between the 2 presentations. So I'll leave a little, we can do a couple of minutes and maybe take a question or 2 here. So if anyone has questions, please put them in the chat now. there have been some excellent and fun commentary comments in the chat about generational differences. So that's been quite fun to see.
If there are no questions, we can totally talk. We're very good at that.
Well, I don't see any questions. So if you have anything you would like to add, now's your chance.
Well, thank you so much for your attention on this today. I did want to say thank you to Mary Beth, who put in about the fight around side parts and skinny jeans. That personally impacted me.
So we do have a question. What sort of programs have you conducted to help develop one big library team? Good question. The answer is we have not been able to. Every time we try, we have been shot down. But eventually we'll get there, and then we'll write about it and report out.
One thing that I've done to circumvent that is we do a lot of journal club activities within our individual library here. Picking pointed articles to discuss and have everyone at the table can be more of an informal, flat hierarchical discussion, especially on hot topics like generations or personal identities. So maybe approaching it outside of a formal component can also be helpful if you hit any roadblocks like we do.
Mm-hmm.
We have another question in the chat for you here from Monique. Has the response from library management been positive in regards to this topic?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say that various library administrators have expressed interest. I don't know how far they've taken that interest. We have applied to teach workshops at various conferences, including management and leadership ones, and we have not been selected, which totally fine. We respect that. This is not a topic that all people are comfortable with.
And I think that reflects, there are recorded webinars and such on this topic I mean, we've had at our organization, you watch it and HR says, good job. But there is a need to customize what already exists to the individual institution and to, the really unique health sciences library settings.
Yes.
So there's interest, but
yeah, and I do too work on this specifically centered within the Japanese American community, and I work with some communication experts exploring these ideas. So I'm hoping that perhaps eventually we'll be able to take some of that work and translate it to libraries and sell it in such a way that libraries will be excited to do it.
Excellent. Well, I'm happy you guys are so enthusiastic about this topic. It's very interesting. We'll probably stop here and transfer over to our next presenters. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
We are going to transition over to our next presentation. This is coming from Nicole Loroff, who's a librarian with the Knowledge Resource Service located at the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital in Edmonton, and Lauren Seal, who's a librarian working with the Knowledge Resource Services as well. And they are going to be doing a presentation on rapid evidence synthesis in COVID-19. Lauren and Nicole, would you like to take over now?
Yeah, I will just share my screen. It will let me. Okay, and you should all be seeing the PowerPoint now.
Yes, we see your PowerPoint. Thank you very much. I will give you guys the 1 minute ding when we get to that point.
Great, thank you. And thanks again, everyone, for attending this session period today. My name's Nicole, and I am a librarian with Knowledge Resource Service.
And I'm Lauren. I'm also a librarian with Knowledge Resource Service here in Edmonton.
Mm-hmm. And before we begin, we want to acknowledge that we both live and prosper off the unceded land of Amishkwasik-Waskaigan, which is located in Treaty 6 territory and is a traditional gathering place for many different nations and peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Dakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and Métis. So for almost a year now, Lauren and I, along with our colleague Rachel, have been supporting Alberta Health Services Scientific Advisory Group, or SAG, in their COVID-19 rapid reviews, primarily in the form of literature searching. So working with SAG has definitely presented some really unique challenges, but also a lot of interesting opportunities. In this presentation, we'll give you some insight into the project and highlight some positive things and some not so positive things that we've worked to overcome. Just before we jump into things though, I want to acknowledge that working with SAG is just one way that Knowledge Resource Service is supporting the COVID-19 response at AHS. Obviously, the pandemic has been a central focus over the past year, so our KRS colleagues have been working on a variety of different projects and supports as well. So I'll hand it off to Lauren to give you more information about SAG and the rapid review process.
Okay, thank you. And if you see me looking down, it's because I'm reading off of my notes because there's so much info to get across. So the Scientific Advisory Group, otherwise known as SAG, which we'll be referring to it as in this presentation, was created in March 2020 with the purpose of providing recommendations to support COVID-19 policy and operational decision-making within the health region through the creation of rapid reviews and information briefs. The group is comprised of clinicians, operational leaders, researchers, and subject matter experts. SAG will also work with researchers from outside of Alberta Health Services, or AHS, on an ad hoc basis, depending on the context of the review and the expertise that's required. So SAG reports, there's so many acronyms, I apologize, to the AHS Emergency Coordination Center, or ECC, which ensures that the health region has a coordinated, provincially overseen approach to the pandemic. Rapid review requests have to either originate or be screened by the Emergency Coordination Center or its Personal Protective Equipment Task Force Subcommittee before being passed on to SAG. Requests will also come directly from Alberta's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dina Hinshaw. So Knowledge Resource Service was contacted in late March 2020, like the 27th, I believe, to be exact, to assist with the searching for these rapid reviews. So we approach these SAG searches as we would any other large, complex mediated search. We perform the necessary reference interview, get an understanding of the information need, figure out any inclusion and exclusion criteria, then craft a search strategy from that, conduct the search and do a first screen of all of the results we find, select the relevant info, and then our wonderful library techs can help get the articles through our document delivery service. However, these searches are a bit different from our regular ones. So in addition to searching our suite of regular subscription databases, we are now also searching COVID-19 specific databases like LitCovid, various organizations' COVID-19 repositories, and preprint servers. And then the biggest difference we've had to contend with is that these searches have to be completed from start to finish in either 8 to 36 hours, which is just ridiculous, a great deal of work. And you can see on the slide, as of January 19th, 2021, our team of 3 librarians has performed over 74 searches for SAG, which is a total of 519 hours, or if we put it into months, it's basically 2 straight months of searching for COVID-19 info. And it is important to note that these numbers are likely low because SAG will sometimes send us multiple questions with one search request, and they'll also send us exploratory questions that don't end up turning into full rapid reviews. And also on the slide, you'll see a link, and it's to the AHS SAG website where these reviews are listed, open access for anyone to read.
Okay, I've also put the link in the chat box if you're interested in taking a quick look. Okay, so now that you know more about SAG and the rapid reviews, I'll start off by talking about a lot of the good things that resulted from working with SAG. So first and foremost is being part of the COVID-19 response in general. It's really gratifying on a personal and professional level to be able to contribute to a project that is having a tangible impact across the province of Alberta, as these reviews are being used to inform policy and patient care. And then these SAG reviews are also openly accessible, so they're being used and referenced worldwide, which is really cool to see. And then another positive aspect for us as librarians is receiving acknowledgement within these reviews for the literature search work, which isn't always standard with KRS, obviously because the majority of searching that we do is for patient care purposes. That being said, working with SAG has led to several publication and authorship opportunities for each of us outside of these rapid reviews. So either SAG will want to pursue a publication of a new article based off of an existing rapid review and will ask us to run the search for it, or a writer that we've worked with will contact us directly and ask us to do the search for a separate publication not relating to SAG. Because these rapid reviews are pretty high profile, being part of the project has been great for demonstrating the value of KRS to the organization and what we bring to the table in terms of our staff skills and our overall services. And then because these rapid reviews are being circulated throughout AHS and beyond, they've been great for marketing. I don't have specific data or statistics to link our involvement with SAG to an increase in website visits or service use, but we are hopeful that since KRS is being acknowledged, that AHS employees who read these reviews and have never heard of KRS before will be more inclined to check us out. But many of the SAG writers have recommended us to their colleagues, and then those colleagues have reached out. So there's definitely new connections being made for sure. And then lastly, having a team of librarians working on this project has been absolutely essential. From the get-go, we've collaboratively built our own little repository of resources that we share, and then we also rely on each other for advice and help when needed. And we collectively problem solve all of the bad and ugly things we'll talk about next. But I just can't imagine how much more difficult it would be to do the work if we were working more individualized and didn't have each other to support.
Okay, am I muted or can you hear me?
We can hear you, Lauren.
Okay, excellent. I wasn't sure if my mic was muting or not. So onto the bad that Nicole was mentioning. These are barriers that we've experienced, but also have worked to overcome and find solutions for. Although we're experienced at performing mediated literature searches and supporting these complex reviews, adapting to SAG's process has posed a couple of challenges. So one of the biggest challenges is just dealing with the sheer amount of information that is available on COVID-19. In a report from Nature that they put on their website in December, they said an estimated 4% of all global research was in 2020 was COVID-19 related, which is huge. Additionally, we're still learning COVID-19 as this pandemic unfolds. We're learning about it and its variants. So articles become outdated very quickly, which means there's a huge amount of information that we have to sift through with every single search we get in. In addition, the information requests we receive from SAG can be very broad, like a search Nicole did on any variant of vitamin D for COVID-19 treatment, to specific, like a search I did on what symptoms would predict a positive COVID-19 test. Depending on the topic, there's either tons of research or very, very little. So to deal with the information overload, we try to create as precise of search strategies as possible and are selective with the resources that we search. We also perform regular updates on select SAG reviews to make sure that they can keep current with the new research findings. We've learned that information overload is really just the reality right now, and that our searches can only ever be a snapshot of the information that's available that day. So in the end, we try to take a pragmatic approach in that we do the best we can given the circumstances. Another challenge has been working with a variety of writers. We found that each writer has their own preferences and expectations when it comes to searching and documentation. So some want us to approach this like it's a systematic review and take note of everything and all of the numbers and retrieval numbers, while others take a very, very much a hands-off approach and want us to just run with it and do our thing. Some writers have come back to us a month or two after we've done a search, wanting to get those article retrieval numbers because they're pursuing publication, and we've had to have these discussions to be like, we don't have them. They weren't asked for at the time. We weren't recording that. And then other writers just lack experience working on rapid reviews, and especially rapid reviews that have such short timelines. We sometimes end up spending quite a bit of time explaining the search process and answering writing questions even, which isn't something that we expected to do. So because of these issues, we've learned to connect with review writers early on in the process to set expectations for both them and for ourselves. We've also learned it's important to adapt to the needs of the writer instead of imposing our ideal way of doing things on them. And just be as open and willing to educate them as possible and needed. Or if we're not able to educate them on the questions they're asking, we can direct them to our proper colleagues who have the right expertise. And then finally, our last challenge has been changing review questions. So it's happened more than once that we'll be sent a rapid review question that it's not completely finalized and they say they're doing more fleshing out with it. And so we've all experienced the frustration of creating a great search strategy, starting the search, pulling articles, and then have the question changed just enough that we have to completely start over. So again, our solution to this was just communication. We connect with the writers as soon as possible and make sure the question is set, and then we avoid the frustration that false starts and stops can bring.
Okay, so on to the ugly aspects, or things that we consider to have been the most difficult in working on these rapid reviews. And as you can probably guess, all of these points have the underlying problem of time. So the most obvious challenge is just the timelines. As Lauren mentioned, we're typically given 8 to 36 hours to conduct a literature search. And then at the beginning of April and May, we were sometimes only given 4 hours if the request was very urgent. So this really, really short turnaround then impacts the time we are able to devote to crafting a search strategy and then actually performing the literature search itself. And then this is further complicated by the issue in that we're doing mediated literature searching. So us as librarians are doing that initial screening of the results, which eats up even more time. So our approach to dealing with timelines, we do the best we can, but we have to make some compromises here and there. So we limit where we search and then how much of the results that we're able to screen depending on what's retrieved. We've also created some efficiencies, so sharing unvalidated search filters that we've created around different topics, or sharing our search strategies, things like that, which helps to speed up things a lot. However, we have found that sometimes there's this unnecessary urgency with timelines that we're given. So we'll do a search and then we'll find out that the results haven't been looked at until a week later, or the rapid review itself is actually not due for several weeks. So we're now far more assertive than what we were in the beginning in terms of establishing timelines, just to give us a little bit more breathing room. Another negative factor has just been work-life balance, and I'm certain it's something that we've all struggled with during this time. But for the first few months, we were getting multiple requests a week, and we were working lunch hours, after work, and on weekends to try and meet this demand. A short-term solution for that is that we were able to flex our time a little bit as we needed, but this wasn't sustainable long-term. So we actually ended up going to our SAG contact, negotiating slightly for longer timelines for these searches, which meant that we weren't getting requests on Friday afternoon and then it being due, Monday morning. So having to balance our day-to-day responsibilities was also a little bit difficult to manage at first, but thankfully our KRS colleagues, they really stepped up, taking on our education sessions or our non-SAG searches and other tasks so that we could focus on our SAG work, which is really helpful. And then finally, stress was a major factor throughout this. And this is stress related to searching and then the pandemic in general. It's obviously been a constant barrage of COVID-19, but we found ourselves, it was often hard to turn our searching brain off. So even on our personal times, we found that we were, checking the news, checking research, and sort of anticipating what the next, say, question might be and what information we could possibly find. So we all experience symptoms of burnout for sure, especially during the spring and the summer. So, we try to prioritize our mental health now and make sure we're taking breaks. And, we're really, really good in terms of allowing each other to take time off, and the other two will cover. So that's just been really important. But thankfully, the requests from SAG have really slowed down lately. It's not so much of a waterfall as now is just a little dribble. So we're not dealing with these issues so much right now, which is good.
And overall, our feeling is, yay, a good one. We all feel really privileged to be part of these rapid reviews. As we all know, it's a very unique and challenging, but also exciting time to be working in health libraries. And we're just grateful that we could contribute our skills to the fight against COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole and Lauren. That was great. Getting a few reactions in the chat of empathy for unneeded urgency and overtime and all of those things. Mm-hmm. There is one question from Jenessa. Just wondering, since the literature could change drastically, do you have a process in place for updating rapid reviews? Or perhaps has this not been requested by the researchers?
So really the requests come to us, Janice. So it's more so SAG's responsibility. If they feel like a rapid review needs to be updated, then they'll come to us to run the search. It's not so much us informing them or keeping track of it that way, just because we have so many rapid reviews now that we just don't have the capacity to keep track of it ourselves.
You have a couple more questions here. One from Judy Kramer. She's wondering in general, how much overtime, do you know how much overtime you worked? Mm-hmm. And then are you getting author recognition for your work on these rapid reviews?
So I can answer part of that, but I'll hand the overtime response to Nicole. We don't necessarily get author credit on it, but they put an acknowledgement note in all of the rapid reviews, right by where the search strategies are, because those are our babies. Nicole, how much overtime have you worked?
Yeah, well, officially and unofficially are probably two different things, but it's been quite a bit, especially at the beginning. It was a lot of working through lunch hours, working after work, sometimes until 7, 8 o'clock at night. I definitely worked a weekend one time. I did have a situation where one was requested on Friday and due on Monday. So it's definitely been more than maybe I initially reported. But now, it's since we've sort of established that, it isn't that unnecessary urgency anymore. It's been much easier to be able to do these searches within our work time.
Excellent. Sorry, I'm just working my way through the chat here. Do you expect the topics to change as the interest in COVID wanes?
We've kind of already seen the topics changing. Like the requests have slowed down a bit. And we're not sure if it's more just there's so much information. It tends to be we're only getting requests now when it's a new drug is seen to be possibly to work to alleviate symptoms and help like that. So it's more, before we were getting questions, like I remember back in April, I got a question on are masks effective because we didn't know back then. And now we don't really get that. It's more like, I had a search where it's like, is ivermectin a good, like, does it help alleviate the symptoms of COVID-19? So yeah, as it wanes, I think also we're still waiting to get questions on COVID-19 variants. So it's just more advanced and difficult searches now.
Yeah, and add to that as well, there's definitely been somewhat of a transition. We're now seeing more search requests dealing with the long-term symptoms of COVID-19 and the rehabilitation of patients. That's been a little bit more popular as of late.
Right. That makes sense. I can say that at our library, we've started to get requests for information about the variants, although there's not much out there yet. Maylin Lay was asking, how do you handle preprints or clinical trial registries? And was there a lot of education that had to happen?
Yeah, so with preprints, it's definitely been a request for it, especially at the beginning, where, you know, they just weren't getting published fast enough for a lot of the topics. We definitely try to inform our writers. So we ask them what they want included if they want us to search preprints, and then going over both the positive and negatives that preprints bring. But, you know, the critical appraisal is on them. It is up to them if they want it to be included. Same with clinical trials. It's more so on them to let us know what they need for their question. So yeah, I haven't searched a lot of clinical trials myself right now in terms of the searches I have done, but I've definitely been asked to do that. So it's really on the writers. Hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, we have run a little over time, so I'm going to cut us off there. Thank you so much for your presentations. And I believe that Ashley will probably post the link in the chat for the next session, which will be a couple of lightning talks. So I invite everyone to head over there and enjoy your afternoons.